Honestly, I'm just so tired of these predatory tow companies thinking they're untouchable, especially when you see guys like Gary chewing on that same disgusting splintered toothpick while destroying people's lives. Anyway, let's see how this plays out.
You know that specific kind of exhaustion where your bones feel like they've been replaced with wet cement? That was me. 9 months. 9 long, grinding, sweat-soaked months floating around the Pacific on a metal island. When you're deployed that long, you don't dream about world peace or winning the lottery. You dream about the simple things. A shower where you don't have to wear flip-flops. A mattress that doesn't feel like a slab of plywood. And for me, my 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. She was Acapulco blue, original engine. A piece of rolling art that I had spent the last 5 years of my life restoring whenever I had a weekend stateside. I had poured blood, sweat, and a slightly embarrassing amount of my military paycheck into that car. She wasn't just a vehicle. She was my anchor. Every time things got rough out on the water, I just closed my eyes and imagined the rumble of that V8 engine, cruising down the Pacific Coast Highway with the windows down and the salty air hitting my face. So, when the cab finally dropped me off at my apartment complex in Oceanside, California, I didn't even care about unpacking. I was dragging my massive green duffel bag across the hot asphalt, my boots heavy, but my heart light. I just wanted to drop my gear in my living room, grab my keys, and go start her up. I turned the corner of Building C, making a beeline for covered parking spot number 42. I had paid an extra $75 a month for that specific spot, because it was under a massive oak tree that kept the California sun from baking the clear coat. I rounded the corner, a tired smile already forming on my face, and stopped dead in my tracks. Spot 42 was empty. Oh, I blinked. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the exhaustion was finally making me hallucinate. Nope, still empty. There was a dark oil stain right in the center of the concrete, but that was it. No Acapulco blue, no chrome bumpers. Nothing. Just a hollow rectangle of empty space. My brain did that funny little skipping thing where it tries to rationalize the impossible. Did I park somewhere else? No, it's my assigned spot. Did someone steal it? It has a kill switch, a steering wheel lock, and a GPS tracker I had disabled to save the battery while I was gone. Did my car magically learn to walk? Did a very specific, incredibly localized tornado touch down in Oceanside and suck up only my vehicle? I dropped my duffel bag. The heavy canvas hit the ground with a dull thud. I walked over to the empty spot, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked around. The complex was quiet. A couple of kids were playing near the pool in the distance, but the parking lot was dead. I looked down at the pavement, scanning for glass, for any sign of a break-in. That's when I saw it. Stuck to the concrete, right where my driver's side door used to be, was a faded, poorly printed neon orange sticker. The edges were peeling, and it looked like it had been run over a few times, but the bold black letters were perfectly legible. Warning: unauthorized vehicle. Towed by Greasy Gary's Towing. Beneath that, scribbled in barely readable blue pen, was the reason. Expired tags. I stared at the sticker for a full minute. My mind just went entirely blank. Expired tags? Are you kidding me? Of course my tags were expired. While I was floating in the middle of the ocean. The DM Fund doesn't exactly have a branch office on an aircraft carrier. I had left the car completely stationary on private property in a spot I explicitly paid for every single month. The shock started to fade, replaced by a slow, burning anger that started in my chest and quickly spread to my fingertips. I pulled out my phone. My hand was actually shaking a little bit. I dialed the leasing office. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Sun-Kissed Meadows Apartments. This is Karen," a voice chirped. It was that specific brand of customer service cheerfulness that sounds like it's being held at gunpoint. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously low. "This is Mark. Apartment 4B. I just got home from deployment. Where's my car?" There was a pause on the line. The sound of aggressive keyboard typing echoed in my ear. "Oh, hi, Mark. Welcome home. Thank you for your service. Let me just pull up your file here. Apartment 4B. 4B? Ah, yes. Your parking spot is number 42. I know what my spot is, Karen. I'm standing in it. What I want to know is why it's empty, and why there's a sticker from a tow company on the ground." "Oh," Karen said, her cheerful tone dropping about 3 octaves into a defensive monotone. "Yes. The Mustang. Well, Mark, during our quarterly lot inspection last month, the property manager noticed that your vehicle registration was out of date. It's in Section 4, Paragraph B of your lease agreement. All vehicles parked on the property must maintain current registration and insurance." I squeezed my eyes shut, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Karen, I was deployed. I was literally on a ship, in the ocean. Kind of hard to hit the DM5 when your nearest landmark is a shark." "I understand that, Mark," she said, her voice taking on that condescending kindergarten teacher edge. "But rules are rules. We have to be fair to all our residents. We can't have unregistered, abandoned vehicles cluttering up the property. It lowers the curb appeal. We placed a warning sticker on your window for 72 hours before we called the tow company." "Abandoned? It's a classic car in perfect condition parked in a covered spot I pay extra for," I was shouting now. I didn't care. "And how was I supposed to see a warning sticker from the Pacific Ocean, Karen? Do you guys issue telepathic notices now?" "There's no need to raise your voice," Karen snapped back, her professional veneer completely gone. "Son, we followed the proper procedures. Greasy Gary's Towing has the contract for this property. You'll have to take it up with them. Have a nice day." Click. She hung up on me. I stood there in the hot sun, staring at the phone in my hand. My beautiful, perfect Mach 1. Sitting in some dirt lot tow yard because Karen from the leasing office thought my expired sticker was ruining the vibe of her precious parking lot. I took a deep breath. I let it out slowly. Panic wasn't going to get my car back. Action was. I grabbed my duffel bag, hauled it up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door, and dumped it in the hallway. I didn't even turn on the lights. I pulled my phone back out and opened the Uber app. Gary had no idea who he just towed. The Uber ride was 20 minutes of pure, unadulterated tension. The driver, a guy named Dave, who smelled like stale vape juice and cheap cologne, tried to strike up a conversation about the local sports team. I just stared out the window, giving him one-word answers until he finally took the hint and turned up the radio. We left the nice, palm tree-lined streets of Oceanside and drove into the industrial outskirts, the part of town where the buildings are mostly corrugated metal and the chain-link fences all have razor wire on top. "This is it, man," Dave said, pulling over to the curb. He looked out the window with a grimace. "You sure you want to be dropped off here? Place looks sketchy as hell." "I'm sure," I muttered, sliding out of the back seat. Greasy Gary's Towing lived up to its name. The yard was a massive expanse of packed dirt and gravel, surrounded by a high fence that looked like it had been hit by cars multiple times. Behind the fence was a graveyard of vehicles, smashed sedans, rusty pickup trucks, and cars with missing wheels sitting on cinder blocks. The office was a dilapidated double-wide trailer sitting on cinder blocks of its own. The windows were barred, and a massive, angry-looking Rottweiler was chained to a post near the door, barking loud enough to rattle my teeth. I walked past the dog, keeping a safe distance, and shoved the heavy metal door to the trailer open. A bell jingled violently above my head. The inside smelled like stale cigarette smoke, cheap coffee, and motor oil. The walls were covered in faded calendars featuring women posing on motorcycles, and the linoleum floor was peeling up at the corners. Sitting behind a heavily scratched plexiglass window was a man who could only be Gary. He looked exactly like you picture a predatory tow yard owner. He was a large man, spilling over the sides of a cheap rolling office chair. He wore a stained gray polo shirt with his company logo stretched tight across his chest. He had a patchy beard, thinning hair, and yes, a splintered wooden toothpick hanging out of the corner of his mouth. He didn't even look up when I walked in. He just kept scrolling on his phone. "Yeah? What do you want?" he grunted, not taking his eyes off the screen. I walked up to the plexiglass. "I'm here for my car. 1969 Mustang Mach 1. Blue. Towed from Sun-Kissed Meadows Apartments." Gary finally looked up. His eyes were small and shrewd. He shifted the toothpick from the left side of his mouth to the right, and he let out a dry, hacking laugh. "Mustang? Oh yeah, I remember that one. Nice ride." "How much to get it out?" I asked, pulling out my wallet. I was prepared to pay whatever extortionate impound fee he wanted and fight him in small claims court later. I just wanted my car back before it got scratched, dented, or worse. Gary leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on the counter. He looked me up and down, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You ain't getting it out, pal." My hands tightened on the edge of the counter. "What do you mean I'm not getting it out? I'm the registered owner. I have my ID. Tell me the fee." "The fee doesn't matter anymore," Gary said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're too late. Car's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone? Did someone steal it from your lot?" I felt a cold spike of dread hit my stomach. "Nah, nobody stole it. I sold it," Gary said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms behind his head. He looked thoroughly pleased with himself. You sold it." The words felt thick and clumsy in my mouth. "You can't sell my car." "Sure I can," Gary shot back, his smirk growing wider. "It's called a mechanic's lien, buddy. Your apartment complex authorized the tow. We dragged it in here. It sat for the required legal period. We sent a certified letter to the address on the registration. Nobody answered. Nobody paid the storage fees. So, standard operating procedure. We auctioned it off to cover the debt." "A certified letter to the address on the registration?" I practically screamed. "The address on the registration is the apartment you towed it from. I wasn't there. I was deployed overseas with the United States Navy." Gary shrugged, a gesture of absolute, callous indifference. "Not my problem. Mailman dropped off the notice. You didn't respond. The law says if you abandon a vehicle and rack up storage fees, I have the right to recoup my losses." "Recoup your losses?" I was seeing red. The edges of my vision were literally getting blurry. "That car is a fully restored numbers-matching classic. It's worth at least $50,000. What did you sell it for?" Gary picked at his teeth with a dirty fingernail. "Auction is an auction. Market dictates the price. Got a buddy of mine who buys project cars. He took it off my hands for $3,000. Covered the tow, the storage fees, and the administrative costs. We're all square." $3,000, $3,000. He stole my $50,000 pride and joy and essentially gave it away to a friend for pennies to cover a fake, manufactured debt. He had legally laundered my car. "You stole my property," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You saw a classic car with expired tags, knew the owner wasn't around, and you fast-tracked a bogus auction to steal it." Watch your mouth, kid, Gary growled, sitting up straight. The smirk was gone, replaced by a scowl. I didn't steal nothing. I followed the letter of the law. You don't like it? Hire a lawyer. But you ain't getting the car back, and you ain't getting a dime from me. Now get the hell out of my office before I call the cops for trespassing. You know what? Don't bother, I said, pulling my phone out. I'll call them for you. I dialed 911 right there in the lobby. I told the dispatcher I was at Greasy Gary's towing, and that the owner had stolen my vehicle and sold it under fraudulent pretenses. Gary just sat there behind his bulletproof glass, shaking his head and laughing. He wasn't scared. He had done this 100 times before. He knew the system, and he knew how to exploit it. 15 minutes later, an Oceanside police cruiser rolled into the dirt lot. A tall, weary-looking officer with a graying mustache stepped out. His name tag read Miller. Let's call him Officer Friendly. He walked into the trailer, took one look at me, and sighed. He looked like a man who responded to this exact location 3 times a week and was sick to death of it. All right. What's the problem here? Officer Friendly asked, hooking his thumbs into his duty belt. This man stole my car, I said immediately, pointing at the plexiglass window. He towed my classic Mustang from my assigned parking spot while I was deployed overseas. He claims he sent a notice, but I wasn't there to receive it, and he just told me he sold a $50,000 car at a private auction for $3,000. Officer Friendly turned to look at Gary. That true, Gary? Gary rolled his eyes. I performed a legal tow authorized by the property manager at Sun-Kissed Meadows. The vehicle sat in my lot accruing fees. I followed the state statutes for abandoned vehicles, sent the certified mail, posted the public notice, and held a lien sale to clear the debt. And I got the paperwork right here. Gary slid a thin manila folder through the slot in the glass. Officer Friendly picked up the folder, flipped through the 3 pieces of paper inside, and handed it back. He turned back to me, his expression entirely devoid of sympathy. It's a civil matter, son, Officer Friendly said, delivering the most frustrating phrase in the English language. There's nothing I can do here. A civil matter, I echoed, stepping toward him. Officer, he just admitted he sold a $50,000 asset to a buddy for $3,000. That's grand theft auto disguised as paperwork. He followed the apartment's towing procedure, the cop replied, his voice flat and practiced. And he followed the state guidelines for a lien sale. If you feel the sale was improper, or if you feel the apartment complex violated your lease by authorizing the tow, your recourse is in the civil courts. You'll have to take them to small claims, or hire a civil attorney. Small claims? I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. The limit for small claims in California is $10,000. This car is worth $50,000. He effectively stole $40,000 from me in broad daylight, and you're telling me no crime has been committed. I'm telling you that according to the paperwork provided, this is a business dispute, not a criminal theft, Officer Friendly said, his tone firming up. The police department does not intervene in civil contract disputes or lien sales. Now, Gary has asked you to leave his property. I suggest you do so, or I will have to cite you for trespassing. I looked from the cop's tired, apathetic face to Gary's smug, triumphant grin behind the glass. Gary tapped the glass with his knuckles, winking at me. He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted the system, used the local laws as a shield, and walked away with my prized possession. He thought I was just some dumb kid who was going to walk away with his tail between his legs and cry about it. I stood there for a moment, the fury boiling inside me. But then, something strange happened. The anger sort of crystallized. It cooled down into a sharp, focused point of absolute clarity. I stopped yelling. I lowered my hands. You're right, officer, I said quietly. Officer Friendly looked surprised. I am? Yeah, I said, a slow smile creeping onto my face. I looked directly at Gary. The smirk on the tow yard owner's face faltered just a fraction of an inch. It's not a local police matter, you're absolutely right. Because Officer Friendly was wrong. It wasn't a civil matter, not for me. You see, when you're an active duty service member deployed overseas, you aren't just protected by standard civilian tenant laws. You are protected by a very specific, very powerful piece of federal legislation. I hadn't thought about it in the blind panic of losing my car, but standing there in that dingy trailer, the legal briefings we got before deploying suddenly flashed through my mind. I didn't say another word to Gary. I didn't argue with the cop. I just turned around, pushed the heavy metal door open, and walked out into the blinding California sun. I pulled my phone out as I walked down the dirt road away from the yard, leaving the barking Rottweiler behind. I didn't need a small claims lawyer, and I needed to make a phone call to a very specific department. Gary thought he used the law to steal my car. He didn't realize he had just committed a massive federal offense. And I was about to drop the entire weight of the United States government on his head. Honestly, I'm just so tired of these predatory tow companies thinking they're untouchable, especially when you see guys like Gary chewing on that same disgusting splintered toothpick while destroying people's lives. I mean, literally, this is exactly why I started Sovereign Justice, to legally wreck people who think the rules just don't apply to them. Anyway, let's see how this plays out. I remember just staring at my phone screen as I walked down that dusty, broken sidewalk away from Gary's lot, literally shaking with this weird mix of adrenaline and pure, concentrated rage. I mean, you have to understand the level of absolute arrogance it takes to look a guy in the eye and essentially say, "Yeah, I stole your $50,000 car, sold it for pocket change, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it." Honestly, it's mind-blowing. But like I said, Gary made a critical error. He assumed I was just a regular civilian tenant. He assumed local state laws regarding mechanics' liens and abandoned vehicles were the highest authority in the land. I guess he missed the memo that federal law trumps state law every single day of the week, and twice on Sundays. I didn't call a civil lawyer. I didn't call small claims court. I called the legal assistance office at Naval Base San Diego. I got patched through to the JAG course, specifically a guy named Captain Miller. But not to be confused with the tired local cop. This Captain Miller was a military attorney, and let me tell you, JAG lawyers are a different breed. They don't deal in petty squabbles, they deal in federal statutes. I explained the situation to the paralegal on the phone, and within 2 hours, I was sitting in a perfectly air-conditioned office on base, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the faint smell of lemon pledge. Captain Miller walked in. He was aggressively squared away. Razor-sharp haircut, uniform pressed so perfectly it looked like it could cut glass, and eyes that looked like they were actively scanning the room for inefficiencies. He sat down, opened a manila folder, ironic considering the thin little folder Gary had slapped against the plexiglass earlier, and looked at me. "So, petty officer," Captain Miller started, so his voice completely devoid of the tired apathy the local cop had. "You're telling me a civilian tow company towed your registered vehicle from your least assigned parking space while you were deployed on the USS Nimitz and subsequently sold it at auction without a court order?" "Yes, sir," I said, leaning forward. "He said he sent a certified letter to my apartment and posted a public notice. Said he followed state law for a lien sale to cover storage fees." Captain Miller actually smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile a shark gets right before it bites a seal in half. "State law," he repeated, almost whispering it. "How quaint." He turned his computer monitor so I could see it. Have you ever heard of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, or SCRA? Honestly, sir. Yes, I remember hearing the acronym in a pre-deployment briefing, but I was mostly just trying to stay awake after a 48-hour watch rotation. Fair enough, Miller chuckled. Let me give you the Cliff Notes. The SCRA is a federal law designed to protect active duty military members from being financially ruined or legally penalized while they are serving their country. It covers a lot of things: evictions, interest rates, default judgments. But specifically, under Section 307 of the SCRA, it is a federal offense. Let me repeat that: a federal offense, to enforce a storage lien on the property or effects of an active duty service member without a direct court order. I just sat there, letting that sink in. Wait, so like a certified letter and a public notice isn't enough? Not even close, Miller said, his eyes gleaming. Gary would have had to petition a federal or state judge, present evidence, and get a judge to sign an order authorizing the sale of your vehicle. And no judge in this country is going to sign an order to sell a deployed sailor's $50,000 asset for $3,000 to cover a fake storage debt. The judge would have stayed the proceedings until you returned from deployment. But Gary didn't do that, I said, feeling a massive grin spread across my face. No, he didn't. He bypassed the courts entirely. Miller leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. By doing so, he didn't just commit a civil tort. He violated federal law. The penalties for a first-time SCRA violation include fines up to $60,000, payable to the Department of Justice. But more importantly for you, it invalidates the lien completely. And Gary is liable for the full replacement value of your vehicle, plus punitive damages for conversion. Okay, so we sue him in federal court? I asked. Oh, it's better than that, Miller said. We don't just sue him. We file a complaint with the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. But in the meantime, I'm going to fast-track a civil suit in federal district court for conversion and violation of the SCRA. Because Gary bypassed the court order, his sale was illegal. He owes you the $50,000, and since he likely doesn't have $50,000 sitting in a checking account, we seize his assets, I finished, the realization hitting me like a freight train of pure joy. Exactly, Miller nodded. We get a federal judgment. If he doesn't pay it immediately, we get a writ of execution. That allows the United States Marshals to go to his place of business and physically seize his property to satisfy the debt. I walked out of that office, feeling like I was 10 feet tall. Gary thought he was a big fish in a small pond, because he knew how to bully local cops with fake state paperwork. He was about to find out what happens when you introduce a great white shark to your little pond. The federal lawsuit was filed the next day. Now, normally these things take months, but the JAG Corps and the DOJ do not mess around when it comes to SCRA violations. It is literally one of the few things that unites everyone in the government in pure, unadulterated anger. They served Gary with a federal summons. And here is the most hilarious, perfectly Gary part of this entire story. He ignored it. I mean, honestly, the hubris of this guy. He gets a massive envelope from the United States District Court, looks at it, probably chews on his gross little toothpick and throws it in the trash, thinking it's just me trying to scare him with fake lawyer letters. Because he didn't show up to the hearing or respond to the complaint, the federal judge issued a default judgment in my favor. $50,000 for the value of the car, plus another $10,000 in punitive damages and legal fees. $60,000 total. When the deadline to pay the judgment passed, which of course it did, because Gary was still living in his delusion of untouchability, the judge signed the writ of execution. That's when I needed to bring in my own heavy artillery. The U.S. Marshals are great, but they don't drive tow trucks. If we were going to seize Gary's assets, which in his case were his massive and expensive commercial tow rigs, we needed someone to actually haul them away. Enter Big Mike. I found Mike by literally Googling commercial heavy-duty repo contractors Oceanside. We met at this greasy spoon diner right off the I-5. Mike was a mountain of a man, wearing a high-vis yellow jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, and hands that looked like they were made of actual granite. He ordered 3 eggs, a steak, and black coffee. I liked him immediately. "So, let me get this straight," Mike said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble, as he poured an irresponsible amount of hot sauce on his eggs. "You want me to bring my crew down to a competitor's yard and tow his tow trucks?" "That is exactly what I want, Mike," I said, sliding the federal writ of execution across the Formica table. "This guy stole my classic Mustang while I was deployed. Sold it under a bogus lien. Federal judge just gave me the green light to seize his assets to pay the 60 grand judgment." Mike picked up the paper, squinting at the dense legal text. He slowly lowered it, and the biggest, most genuinely terrifying grin spread across his face. "I know Greasy Gary," Mike rumbled, taking a massive bite of his steak. "Guy's a bottom feeder. Gives the whole industry a bad name. Predatory towing, illegal drops, you name it. We've had words before when he tried to poach one of my commercial contracts." "So, are you in?" I asked. Mike laughed, a booming sound that made a couple of people in the booths next to us turn around. "Kid, I wouldn't miss this for the world. I'll bring the big rigs, the 50-ton rotators. We're going to clean them out." We spent the next hour planning the logistics. And it had to be a surgical strike. We couldn't just show up and politely ask Gary for his trucks. We had to hit him hard, fast, and with overwhelming force before he could try to hide the assets or barricade the yard. We decided on Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. Tuesday was the day after the weekend impound rush. His yard would be full, all his trucks would be on site doing administrative organizing, and Gary would be at his most comfortable. The weekend dragged by. I honestly don't think I slept more than 3 hours a night. I was just vibrating with anticipation. I spent the time cleaning my apartment, staring at the empty parking spot number 42 from my balcony, and just visualizing the look on Gary's face. Tuesday morning finally arrived. The marine layer was thick over Oceanside, turning the sky a pale, cool gray. As I met Captain Miller and 2 United States Marshals at a staging area, an abandoned strip mall parking lot about a mile from Gary's yard. The Marshals were wearing tactical vests, badges clearly displayed, looking serious and professional. Then, the ground literally started to shake. Big Mike rolled into the parking lot, leading a convoy of 3 of the most massive, beautiful, intimidating tow trucks I have ever seen in my life. These weren't your standard flatbeds. These were Peterbilt heavy-duty wreckers, the kind they used to pull overturned semi-trucks out of ditches. They hissed with air brakes and gleamed with chrome. Mike hopped out of the lead truck, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "All right, gentlemen," one of the marshals said, gathering us around the hood of his SUV. "We have a valid federal writ of execution, and our primary objective is to secure the premises and prevent the destruction or concealment of assets. Mike, your crew will stand by until we clear the yard and identify the specific assets to be seized to satisfy the $60,000 judgment. Mark, you stay behind us. Do not engage with the target unless we tell you to. Everyone understand?" We all nodded. I was practically bouncing on my heels. We rolled out. The marshal's SUV took the lead, followed by my Uber, because I still didn't have a car, thanks to Gary, and then Big Mike's convoy of mechanical leviathans bringing up the rear. We turned onto the dusty industrial road, leading to Greasy Gary's towing. I could see the razor wire fence gleaming in the dull morning light. The marshals didn't park on the street. They pulled their SUV right up to the massive chain-link rolling gate, was effectively blocking anyone from leaving. The marshals stepped out, hands resting near their duty belts, and walked purposefully toward the dilapidated double-wide trailer. I followed a few paces behind, my heart hammering in my throat. This was it. The climax. The moment of absolute, undeniable, malicious compliance. One of the marshals didn't even bother with the jingling bell on the door. He just shoved the heavy metal door open with a loud bang. "Federal marshals," he announced, his voice echoing off the cheap wood-paneled walls of the trailer. "Who is in charge here?" Gary was sitting behind his scratched plexiglass window, a half-eaten donut in one hand and his phone in the other. He jumped so hard he dropped the donut on his dirty polo shirt. The splintered toothpick practically flew out of his mouth. What is this?" Gary stammered, his small eyes darting between the two armed federal agents. Then his eyes landed on me, standing just behind them. His face went through a rapid succession of colors, pale white, then a deep, angry red. "You! I told you to get off my property! I'm calling the cops!" "You do not need to call the local police, sir," the lead marshal said calmly, sliding a thick stack of papers through the slot in the plexiglass. "We are executing a federal court order. You are Gary Henderson, owner and operator of Greasy Gary's Towing?" "Yeah, I'm Gary," he snapped, ignoring the papers. "And you guys are trespassing. This is a private business. That kid is just mad because I legally sold his abandoned car. So local PD already came out here and told him it's a civil matter." "It was a civil matter," the marshal corrected him, his tone turning instantly freezing. "Until you ignored a federal summons for violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act. A federal judge has issued a default judgment against you in the amount of $60,000. Since you have failed to satisfy that judgment, we are here to execute a writ of seizure on your business assets." Gary literally laughed. He actually threw his head back and laughed. "Seize my assets? Are you out of your minds? You can't just come in here and take my stuff. I have rights. I know the law." "Evidently you don't," Captain Miller said, stepping out from behind me. He looked pristine in his uniform, a stark contrast to the squalor of the trailer. "Because if you knew the law, you wouldn't have illegally sold a deployed sailor's vehicle. Open the security door, Mr. Henderson. Now." Gary's laugh died in his throat. He looked at the marshals. He looked at Miller. Then he looked out the small, barred window of his trailer and saw Big Mike's 3 massive Peterbilt wreckers idling menacingly right outside his gate. The reality of the situation finally, violently, crashed down on him. "You're not taking my trucks," Gary said, his voice suddenly sounding very small and panicked. He scrambled for his desk phone. "I'm calling the real cops, the Oceanside PD. They know me. They'll throw you feds out of here." The marshal didn't even try to stop him. He just crossed his arms and waited. "By all means, make the call." Gary frantically dialed 911, screaming into the receiver that armed men were trying to rob his business. We just stood there in silence for about 10 minutes. I could hear the loud, frantic clicking of Gary bouncing his knee under his desk. Finally, the wail of a local police siren pierced the air. A familiar white and blue Oceanside PD cruiser pulled up behind Big Mike's rigs. And who steps out? None other than Officer Friendly, the exact same tired cop with the graying mustache who had told me to kick rocks a few weeks ago. Gary sprinted out from behind his plexiglass cage, throwing the front door open. "Miller! Officer Miller! Get these guys out of here! They're trying to steal my trucks!" Officer Friendly walked up, his hand resting casually on his belt. He looked at Gary, then he looked at the 2 federal marshals. Then he looked at Captain Miller. And finally, his eyes landed on me. He stopped walking, but you could physically see the exhaustion hit him as he realized what was happening. "Gary?" Officer Friendly sighed, his voice heavy. "What is going on here?" "These guys are impersonating federal agents," Gary yelled, spitting slightly as he spoke. "That kid brought his fake military buddies to try and steal my property because I legally towed his car. Arrest them!" Officer Friendly didn't look at Gary. He walked straight up to the lead U.S. Marshal. The Marshal held up his badge and handed the local cop a copy of the federal writ. "United States Marshal Service," the agent said. "We are executing a federal seizure order authorized by the district court. Mr. Henderson is in violation of the SCRA and owes a $60,000 judgment." Officer Friendly read the paper. He read it twice. He handed it back to the marshal, let out a long, slow breath, and turned to Gary. "Gary," Officer Friendly said, his tone entirely flat. "What? Arrest them," Gary demanded. "Gary, they're federal marshals," the cop said, sounding like he was explaining gravity to a toddler. "They have a federal court order signed by a judge. I don't have jurisdiction here." "What do you mean you don't have jurisdiction?" Gary shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is Oceanside. This is your town. I told you last time, this is a civil matter." I couldn't help it. I stepped forward, looking right into Gary's panicked, sweaty face. "You know, Gary," I said, pitching my voice to perfectly mimic the cop from 2 weeks ago, "it looks like this is a civil matter. Nothing the local police can do here." The look on Officer Friendly's face was absolutely priceless, and he actually had to bite his lip to stop from laughing. He just nodded at me, turned on his heel, and walked back to his cruiser. He didn't even say goodbye to Gary. He just got in his car, reversed, and drove away, leaving Gary completely and utterly defenseless against the federal government. "All right, the show is over," the lead marshal said, turning to the gate. He keyed his radio. "Mike, bring the rigs in. Let's start hooking them up." The massive steel gates rolled open, and Big Mike's fleet rumbled into the dirt lot like an invading army. The air filled with the deafening roar of diesel engines and the hiss of hydraulics. Gary completely lost his mind. He ran out into the yard, waving his arms frantically, trying to stand in front of his precious tow trucks. No, you can't take the flatbed. I need that for a contract this afternoon. Take the old wrecker in the back." "We're not negotiating, Mr. Henderson," the marshal said, gently but firmly physically moving Gary out of the way. "The judgment is for $60,000. We are seizing assets until we hit that estimated auction value." I stood back with Captain Miller and watched the absolute poetry of malicious compliance unfold. Big Mike's crew didn't mess around. They bypassed the junk cars and went straight for Gary's livelihood. First, they hooked up his newest, shiniest flatbed truck, the one he probably used to haul my Mustang away. I watched as the massive chains locked onto the front axle, lifting the entire front end of Gary's rig off the ground. "That's a $100,000 truck," Gary screamed, pulling at his thinning hair. "You're ruining me!" "At auction, it'll probably fetch 30, Mike yelled back over the engine noise, grinning like a maniac from the cab of his Peterbilt. "Hook up the heavy wrecker next, boys." Next went his heavy-duty wrecker, the massive rig he used for commercial towing. Then went his backup flatbed. In less than 45 minutes, Gary's entire operational fleet, the tools he used to prey on people, were chained to the back of Big Mike's trucks. But the marshals weren't done. "We're still a little short on the estimated value," the second marshal noted, checking his clipboard. He looked at the dilapidated double-wide trailer. "Let's clear the office." I swear, Gary started crying, actual tears streaming down his face. We walked into the office. The marshal seized his computers, his filing cabinets, the commercial printer he used to print out his fake lien notices. And yes, I kid you not, they even seized the nasty, ripped faux leather couch sitting in the corner of the lobby. They loaded it all onto a smaller utility trailer Mike had brought along. Gary was reduced to sitting on a plastic lawn chair in the dirt outside his empty trailer, his head in his hands, watching his entire empire get hauled away. I walked up to him right before we left. He didn't even look up. "You know," I said casually, looking at the empty space where his flatbed used to be, "if you had just given me my car back, or even just paid me what it was worth, none of this would have happened. You thought you found a loophole to steal from people. But honestly, you really should have read the fine print." Gary just sobbed, a pathetic, broken sound. But we rolled out of the yard, a triumphant convoy of federal justice. I rode in the cab with Big Mike, laughing the entire way back to the impound lot where the government would hold the assets for auction. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Greasy Gary. Without his trucks, he couldn't fulfill his municipal contracts. His business folded in less than a month. The DOJ hit him with an additional civil penalty for the SCRA violation, effectively bankrupting him. The U.S. Marshals auctioned off his trucks and equipment. The government took their cut, and a few weeks later, a beautifully thick cashier's check for $50,000 arrived in my mailbox. Plus the $10,000 for punitive damages. But the story doesn't end there, because sovereign justice isn't just about destroying the bad guys, it's about making things right. And I used a portion of that money to hire a private investigator. It took him 2 days to track down the buddy Gary had sold my Mustang to. The guy lived up in Vista, California. He wasn't malicious. He just thought he got a killer deal at a sketchy auction. I showed up at his house with the cash. I explained the situation, that the car was stolen property seized during an illegal sale. I offered him $10,000 cash to sign the title back over to me right then and there. He made a $7,000 profit for doing nothing and handed me the keys with a smile. I drove my Acapulco Blue Mach 1 back down the Pacific Coast Highway that afternoon. The V8 rumbled perfectly. The ocean air smelled incredible. I parked it right back in spot number 42 at Sun-Kissed Meadows. I made sure to wave at Karen in the leasing office on my way upstairs. As for Gary, last I heard, the guy who used to terrorize the streets of Oceanside with his tow trucks is currently working the graveyard shift as a cashier at a bait and tackle shop out by the pier. No trucks, no power. Just selling frozen squid to tourists. And that, my friends, is why you never, ever try to tow a deployed military member's car. The law isn't just a weapon for the corrupt. When used correctly, it is an absolute hammer of justice. Honestly, it's just beautiful. See you guys on the next one, and always remember to check your local and federal statutes.